This is the map Avarice Stand from the Ticalla Jungle expansion. Using it, I'm going to teach you the rules for palm trees and underbrush, and because I'm also going to be making a master game guide video for Swarm of the Marro and Battle for the Underdark, which will largely be like my Learn the Master Game rules for the Rise of the Valkyrie videos, I'm going to incorporate the rules for swamp water, shadow tiles, and rock outcroppings in this video as well. This is swamp terrain, and it acts just like sand, rock, and grass, where it has no special terrain rules. So, let's get into these rules. These are the jungle pieces: palm trees and underbrush. Each jungle piece that came in this set occupies one single hex space. Jungle pieces may be placed adjacent to tiles or on top of tiles. When placed, a jungle piece must have at least 2 or more of its 6 connecting faces connected to another hex tile. For example, a palm tree may attach to a swamp water tile, a sand tile, and another jungle piece. Pretty self-explanatory, just to make sure that at least 2 of the 6 faces are connected to another hex tile to prevent wobbling and just other messing with the rules. Our Archmage Sonlin here has a movement of 5. So, using jungle piece rules, figures are not allowed to occupy or move through jungle spaces. You may remove a canopy to access hard-to-reach areas of the battlefield, but you must reattach it afterwards. If a figure cannot fit on a space under a canopy, you cannot remove the canopy to allow figures to move onto that space. So, when moving your figure adjacent to a jungle piece, you are allowed to move any part of the lower plants of the jungle piece that hang over the space the figure will occupy. A figure may not be placed on any space adjacent to a jungle piece if the figure being placed does not fit fully on the space. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, he can go right there. Line of sight. Jungle pieces may block line of sight. Ranged attacks can be used only when a clear line of sight is available between or through jungle pieces. So, remembering that we take a look at Sonlin's army card here, you remember that line of sight is drawn from their target point, the green dot on their card, and hit zones are anything red on the card. We're going to have Sonlin try and see if he can hit one of these Marro stingers, which, as you can see, their weapons are gray, which means those are not targetable areas. Measuring from Sonlin's target point, we can see that if we look through this underbrush, the Marro stinger's head is visible, and Sonlin can take an attack, or use a special power if it requires line of sight. And an example of not seeing through jungle pieces, Sonlin cannot see the Marro stinger through multiple jungle pieces, but he's there. Here are some rules for the master game only. The following additional rules apply when playing the master game, such as attacking figures adjacent to a jungle piece with range. A figure becomes adjacent to a jungle piece when it moves next to a jungle piece. When a small, medium, or large figure adjacent to a jungle piece is defending against a non-adjacent attack, the defending figure receives 1 additional defense die. So, if Sonlin attacks this Marro Drudge, he is next to the tree here, adjacent, so he gets an extra defense die when rolling. That being said, there are some rules for adjacency that are exceptions, such as most of the time if a figure is next to a jungle piece, they are adjacent. But if a defending figure's base is on a level equal to or higher than the height of a jungle piece, they are not considered adjacent. If a figure is next to a space under a canopy, that figure is not adjacent to a jungle piece. When determining adjacency to a palm tree, the figure must be next to the trunk of the tree. So, for example, this Marro Drudge is next to the trunk. And although the Marro Drudge is higher than the trunk, it is not higher than the total height of the tree, so that is why it is considered adjacent to the trunk. And going back to point number 2 of the exceptions was if a figure is next to a space under a canopy, that figure is not adjacent to the jungle piece. Visually, that's pretty simple. It just means, like right here, the canopy would cover these hexes, so this is not considered adjacent. In this example here, Sonlin wants to make another ranged attack. However, this Marro Stinger is adjacent to a jungle piece, but he also has height advantage. Because this is one level higher, and his base is higher than Sonlin's base, he gets the extra defense die from height advantage. If he was 10 levels higher than the height of Sonlin's base, then he would get 2 additional defense dice. And a quick reminder that if the roles were reversed and the Stinger was attacking Sonlin, after checking range and line of sight, you would check the height advantage. He would get the extra die for the attack, being a level higher than Sonlin's base. And if he was 10 levels higher than Sonlin's height, he would get 2 extra combat dice when rolling for an attack. And just another alternate take on height advantage. If Sonlin was attacking the Stinger is 8 levels high and adjacent to this piece here because he's not higher than the tree itself. So he would get a total of 2 extra defense dice. 1 for the height advantage and 1 for being adjacent to a jungle piece. And in this example, again, we'll go over adjacent and not adjacent to jungle pieces. The underbrush pieces have a height of 9, and certain palm trees have 14, 15, and 16. So, in this example here, Sonlin is the only figure adjacent to a jungle piece, because his base is next to the underbrush. This one is on a space next to a piece under a canopy, as well as these two up here. So only Sonlin would get the adjustment for defense dice standing next to a jungle piece. A defending figure never receives more than 1 additional defense die, even if it is adjacent to multiple jungle pieces. However, the factors such as height advantage may give defending figures more additional defense dice. In this example, Sonlin is attacking this Marro Stinger, which is adjacent to 2 jungle pieces and has height advantage. The Marro Stinger rolls 2 additional defense dice, 1 for the height advantage and 1 for being adjacent to multiple jungle pieces. Attacking an adjacent figure. A defending figure adjacent to a jungle piece does not roll 1 extra defense die when attacked by an adjacent figure. In this example here, when defending against an adjacent attacking figure, Sonlin does not receive an extra defense die for being adjacent to the jungle piece. And before we get into the differences between water and swamp water, we'll just quickly go over the rules again for water. Moving on to water. When you move onto a water space from any other space, even from another water space, you must end your move there. In this example, the firelag spider goes down into the water and must stop its move on this space. If it already was in the water and moved 1 space here, it would have to stop again. Moving on to swamp water. Unlike moving through water, when you move onto a swamp water space from any other space, you may continue moving if you have moves left. 1, 2, 3. Moving from water or swamp water to land. For water spaces or swamp water spaces that are lower than their adjacent land spaces, the moving up rule applies. When moving from water or swamp water to land, count the side of each land space as you move. So this hex here would be 1 side, 2, 3, and then we would stop there for just the sake of not counting out an entire move. So, when moving this firelag spider from starting water space or swamp water space up onto the adjacent land space, you count 2 spaces because the water is considered a level lower than the land space. The firelag spider then continues its move for its full total, or chooses to stop for a more advantageous strategic position. And now we will quickly go over the shadow tile and the rock outcropping rules. So this Krav Maga agent is going to make an attack, and for this example, we will say the Azumi Samurai is standing on the shadow tile. Being lower, down in the swamp water, the Azumi Samurai would have height advantage already, so would be rolling an extra defense dice. He's also standing on a shadow tile, and when a small, medium, or large figure is defending, and on at least 1 shadow space, that figure rolls an additional defense die, so he's up to 2. But going over the rules that we just learned for the underbrush, the jungle pieces, he would roll an additional defense die there. So this Azumi Samurai has 3 additional defense die being rolled when the Krav Maga agent attacks. So we will say instead that the Azumi Samurai was back here, and the Krav Maga agent wants to go make an attack. Standing here and looking back through his line of sight, you cannot see the Izumi samurai. But what this Krav Maga agent didn't know is that also Heirloom was lurking on the other side of this rock. So always pay attention to your surroundings because you could move your figure into a dire situation. So that concludes the video going over the jungle pieces of underbrush and palm trees, swamp water, and the shadow tiles and rock outcroppings. These, coupled with any other possible terrain that Heroscape may have, just add many different ways and many different styles to play the game. Flex your imagination, mix and match the terrain, create maps, and have a lot of fun. Heroscape has an immensely deep system if you take the time to explore it, analyze it, and apply all the rules that you've learned to make really interesting maps and keep the game changing and have a different experience every time you play, even if you play on the same maps.